Hi there, I'm Dr. Ute, an accredited and chartered counseling psychologist, a chartered coaching psychologist, a fellow of the higher education here in Britain, and a therapist. I welcome you to the podcast. The podcast is a little bit different to how other podcasts are working. My guests are asking me questions. They are often from my population of students who said, look, we really want to ask you questions we can't ask in the lecture hall. But this podcast is also open to you. If you have questions you ever wanted to ask a psychologist, DM me and you will be sitting next to me very soon. Enjoy the podcast. Hello. Hello to Phoebe, hello to Richard, and to questions that they have prepared but never shared with me. Things they always wanted to ask a psychologist, and I hope it's interesting for you guys. I'm super excited.
Yes, so something that we've spoken about a little bit has been the perspective of like a man being a therapist. Mm-hmm. And it's something that we've had some quite interesting conversations about because like, I mean, my perspective is like, I think that sometimes it's quite unnatural for like a male therapist, I guess, to be seen in that environment. And I guess I feel like sometimes that's it's challenging for me to think about getting into that career, I guess, because you don't typically see men doing that job. And some of the conversations that we've had around that have been how sometimes like you know, women might not feel comfortable like talking to a male therapist, and how, you know, it's like how necessary is that. And I think what we wanted to ask you was what your perspective is on that, and how, you know, I sometimes think, oh, is that like something that's maybe harmful for like masculinity and like diversity in that space, or is it something that actually, you know, sometimes it's just what people feel comfortable with, like, for, you know, what's the sort of what's your perspective on that?
So I think there are probably, I don't know the numbers, right? So if you guys have different numbers, let me know, and if I'm going wrong, just, you know, write it. Same for you, of course. This is just my life experience. There are many more female therapists than male therapists, and many more than transgender therapists, right? And I think it also comes down to pay, because, you know, if you go into the higher paid position, it actually changes very quickly. So you have quite often then service leaders who are then men, even though the workforce is predominantly female, which I think is quite interesting. I myself am not a man. I'm a full-blown woman. So I can only answer from that perspective. I think therapy often comes with this understanding you need to be caring, right? And caring has probably a very particular meaning. It has a bit of this mothery thingy. So I myself am not a mother. I don't know how people would describe me as caring, right? In that sense, my care is a very different one. And I'm often wondering whether this is something male therapists struggle with. I'm very blessed that I have incredibly good friends, peers who are men, who are fabulous therapists, right? I myself had a male therapist for 3 years. And I looked for a male therapist because I thought I want to work with a man. I think that we need to have different therapists for different things, right? When people come to therapy and say, I do not want to work with a man, I think that's a red flag, right?
Yes.
And let me just go full blown into something quite gruesome, if you allow me to do so, right? If somebody says, I don't want to work with a man because I've been abused by a man, I come from a perspective that it's probably helpful to work with a man.
Right. Yes.
Because because not all men are abusers, right? Same the other way around. I don't want to work with a woman because I was abused by a woman. Then it might be really helpful to work with a woman
and to learn that you can actually trust.
Yes.
In the case of a woman, a man, or
So I'm very skeptical about self-selection, I must say, because I think self-selection quite often holds the danger of avoidance. And that is a shame, because at the end of the day, therapy is exposure to your fears, right? And if you come in through avoidance, you are possibly avoiding to be exposed to a big fear. I think we need therapists from all different angles of life. Not because a man matches better with a man, a transgender matches better with a transgender, or a German matches best with a German. I think that's utter rubbish. But because we need to have different views on therapy, on peer groups, on supervision, on working with patients. And I think patients need to be able to change therapists, right? From across genders, across colors, across nationalities, across cultures. Because at the end of the day, we need to shift perspective, right?
Yeah.
So that's...
I think that's a really interesting point about, a woman actually maybe needing to have a male therapist, even if she was abused by a man, in order to learn how to trust them again. Because, in my life, just in general, I found a lot of trust for men in general, because we hear a lot about, how men can be scary or men can be like a threat to women. But actually, my male friendships and the people that I have in my life who are very close to me, they're the people who have helped me and guided me and told me that actually there are men I can trust, there are good men. So I can see that having that in your therapist can actually probably heal part of you in that way. And that's really interesting.
And that's always like, it's it becomes a bit of a vehicle for the therapy, I guess, like that kind of conflict that someone might have with a man, like it's sort of, and I think it's like, I guess it's one of those things that hopefully, being that you were talking about sort of like diversity and having a real mix of people in those environments, and I guess the more that happens, the more people will feel represented in those spaces. And I guess it's a bit of an interesting one, isn't it? Because like in so many other areas of life, like that's not really the way around it is, basically. So I guess it's a unique position for men to be in that they are underrepresented in that way as well. So it's kind of like, I guess, experiencing a little bit of what a little taste of what it might be like for women in all other areas
in all
of
other
life,
industries,
depending on what they want to do. So so that's an interesting one.
And then another question that we actually have been discussing as well is sort of psychology terms, or maybe even a diagnosis that you might have of some kind of mental illness, or even you do a test online about what attachment style you are and it tells you you're avoidant. We were wondering if these kinds of terms, or I think terms, possibly can sometimes actually be damaging to a person, in that they might subconsciously play up to it, maybe consciously or subconsciously, or they've been told, oh, I'm an avoidant attachment type, so then they start kind of exhibiting that kind of behaviour. Or what's your thoughts on that?
I have a deep hate for online tests. I've done an online test. I've got ADHD. No, you have not. Let's just be very clear. Look, let me give you an example. We are all so attached to this idea of personality types, right? And then you can make a test, and then you come to me and you say, actually, I'm an introvert. And then they say, Dr. Ute, I'm an introvert and I would like to be an extrovert. And I sit there and I think, okay, Let's just breathe.
Yeah.
And let me give you the following example. Just imagine for a moment and that an introvert self as the holistic only way of being exists. Let's just imagine in this. Okay.
Yeah.
If this person is born into a family of scholars of Latin, right? This personality type, which is static and will never change, how do you think this person will behave in the world? What will their behavior be? How will they represent? So if we put a bit of fancy languages, what is the genotypic presentation of that person, right?
Yeah.
I know I'm using the term wrongly, but I just want to make a point here, right, about the unchangeability, what these tests trying to sell. And now imagine a person with the same type is born to, I don't know, Ozzy Osbourne's family, / whatever hardest heavy metal rocker you can possibly imagine. This shows my age now, right? How would they behave in the world? And are you really going to tell me they behave the same way?
No.
So what are we actually talking about here, right?
Yeah.
Because you are not feeling good and you are sad for, I don't know, a week, you're really depressed? Yeah?
Yeah.
Because you're not very impulse controlled, you've got ADHD?
Right. Yeah.
Because you find social interaction difficulties, you're autistic? These words, they have a really particular meaning.
Yeah.
And I think it is incredibly dangerous to be using them nilly-willy, right? When we use words about ourselves, we also bring a particular lived reality into being,
Right. Yeah.
right?
So if you're calling yourself an introvert, then
You better behave as an introvert, right? Now just imagine you are going out and you, I don't know, dance on the table because you have a good time, given you're not taking drugs or you're not giving, you have your booze, because that's what introverts need to do apparently in order to be, you know, what's going to happen then? Are you having a crisis with yourself because all of a sudden you don't tick the boxes any longer?
you're not fitting that mold of what an introvert is.
I think what these tests often do to us, they take away our ability to really start observing ourselves, right? Who am I? And what you will notice is in different situations you behave differently, right? People tell me I'm an extrovert. You should see me at a party, I don't know anyone. Extrovert. Or you say bite my foot or whatever. Because I'm the one who is like, if I just had one person to... I don't like small talk. I hate it. Right?
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, it creates quite a set way of like, I have to kind of respond to everything in this way.
Yeah.
And I guess like you were kind of, it was another question that I kind of had off the back of that, which is like, you started kind of answering it really nicely there, which was like kind of online especially, like there's a lot of people who might take an ADHD test or an autism test and then use the term like undiagnosed autism or undiagnosed ADHD, and I guess it kind of links into some of that discussion. And I guess it's like what kind of questions can we ask ourselves in, you know, whether you belong to those communities or not as well, like about, you know, what questions should we start asking ourselves to kind of improve the sort of debate online about that. You know, you said like who am I, as like, which I thought kind of sparked that interest in me. Like,
yeah, for me, I ask the question, what's the function, right? When people come to my private practice and they say, look, I would like to be diagnosed with ADHD, or can you do an ADHD diagnosis? Listen to the wording, right? Can you do an ADHD diagnosis? Which means, can you give me the diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
Which is, no, No, we can go through the procedure, which is a very long procedure, right? The moment you go somewhere and they say, it takes an hour to get a diagnosis, run! Run. It doesn't matter what title these people hold. It doesn't matter how much money they charge you.
Yeah.
Run away, because it's not grounded in good work. My question always is, what's the function? What is the function of having this title?
Yeah.
Right? What do you want to do with it? If you don't want to do anything with it, why do you want it? I have worked with people who were so incredibly joyful, knowing this is the reason why I am the way I am, and this can be a simple reason for wanting a diagnosis, a proper diagnosis. Again, run away if it's an hour. Okay, this can be a reason. This can be a beginning of healing. I have had people who said, oh my goodness, now I'm done. What's the treatment? Well, not really treatment for it, right? Yes, we can give you drugs. It works for half of the people. It works, for the other half it doesn't. So what do I do with it? Which puts the diagnosis into despair. So I'm giving two extremes of the bell curve. I think we need to really be much more careful. What's the function of it? Because the difference between a psychiatric or a psychological, a mental health diagnosis and a broken bone is, it's not based on such objective measurements, right? It's not.
And like, I guess at the end of that, you're going to have to come back to yourself at the end of whatever diagnosis you might receive.
Yeah.
And then it's going to be you who's going to take you through that. And I always think of like, I guess like self-esteem being like this sort of spearhead of any situation like that. And if you've got to come back to yourself to sort of like find that, I guess, to get through those difficult moments, I guess, which is maybe why it's so good to sort of really be able to sort of actually ask yourself those questions and be able to like return to yourself, especially like, I mean, there might be some like quite valid reasons for getting a diagnosis if you've got like a child who has some evidence of neurodivergence, so, because there's obviously like concrete things that you need, extra support in school and so on as well. So I just want to acknowledge that as well. But I think, it's definitely like, you know, you got to come back to yourself, because you're ultimately like, you can't, you know, you can't use self-esteem to like cure a broken bone, but like at the same time self-esteem can be useful for getting through and living with some kind of like diagnosis as an adult or a child. So.
And like you said, it's not all bad with these terms. Like, I think I related very much to the comfort that having a name for something, that everything you've been going through, it has a name. Other people are going through it too. It's not just my thing. But I think there definitely is a balance that needs to be found somewhere in the middle.
I think there must be a balance, and not every sadness is depression, right? Not every worry and fear is an anxiety disorder, or not every time when your breath is getting faster you have a panic attack. That's just not the way it is. So if we consistently talk in these superlatives, we are losing the detail. But you know, life is lived in the detail. Yeah. It's not just this or that. And I think, I mean, look, psychology for me has a big role to play, that we started to talk about positive emotions and negative emotions. I chucked this out of the window, because emotions for me, nothing else but a data point of how I am existing in the world. And the more difficult emotions, which sadness and fear, jealousy definitely are also important data points of how I live my life in this world at the moment, right?
Right,
Yeah, like, there's no good or bad. It's just, it is like, and it's kind of like, it reminds me of like, when we were doing your lectures, and like we would come into class, and like I always give this example of like why that experience was so interesting for us as students, because you would sit us down in the lecture halls and we would do like a mindfulness breathing exercise, or like a quick meditation or something, like for 5-10 minutes before the class like started. And I think it's kind of like, you know, having to sort of do that before you talk about all of these quite sensitive things was really useful. But it's like, just a different way of actually being able to sort of check in with how you're like the value that you're placing on these different emotions and whether they're good and whether they're bad, and like, and that's something that I think it definitely stands out to me as like a memorable like aspect of like you as a teacher. So it just made me think of that in the moment actually. So yeah.
We've come to an end.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all the questions. I thought they were fascinating. I hope you found them fascinating too. Looking forward to your comments. And look, if you want to sit on either of these chairs and ask me questions, just DM me. Thank you.